What happens when we die? Do we simply cease to be? Or do we survive in some form? What is it that makes us unique, conscious beings? It's the greatest mystery of existence, a problem seemingly too big for science to solve. But today, a cluster of biologists, physicists, and philosophers are closing in on the answer to the ultimate question. Is there life after death?
Alrighty, so the source I chose for the Module 1 project is a literary piece that addresses the correlation fiction has with truth. It is presented to readers in the form of an article titled "The Fiction of Truth and the Truth of Fiction." The author, Liam Callanan, is an American author specializing in Catholic writing and professor of English at the University of Wisconsin. This piece of work is fairly recent, having been published on October 31st, 2017, under the Arts and Culture section in AmericanMagazine.org. Callanan is no stranger to the art of writing. He has written several novels, some of which include The Cloud Atlas, All Saints, and a short story collection titled Listen. It is evident that throughout his career, Callanan has established himself credibility in the fields of rhetoric, writing, and language, making his article a reliable source to use for research on the topic. Take a look of a clip I found, uploaded by American Magazine. They go in depth about Liam Callanan's personal life, what motivates him to write. I know it's a long video, so I'll summarize it up a little bit for you. Liam talks about how his Catholic belief influences him to write fiction. He believes that through fiction we are able to exercise our ability to believe. Here's one of my favorite quotes from him.
What does it mean to believe? And I feel like the muscle that generates belief is something that you can kind of practice amongst each other before you even get to those higher realms of religious faith. But it's a profound sense of these characters trying to believe in each other and believing in things that they can't see.
The article is structured as a timeline of Callanan's writing career. When most people are asked the difference between fiction and nonfiction, they will most likely say that fiction is not real, while nonfiction is. The article debunks that popular view of fiction and goes on to say that truth is found in fiction, and that fiction has the ability to make us see things that nonfiction cannot. Callanan believes that through his writing, he will be able to reach out to his audience, those using fiction as a creative outlet to seek a sense of belief, and instill belief in hopes of others obtaining faith in themselves and in life in order to live with a continuous sense of grace, therefore fulfilling his role as a faithful Christian man under God. His goal in writing this piece is to encourage people to believe, and he achieves this goal through fiction writing. As far as structure is concerned, Callanan organizes the work as a timeline of his career that he breaks down into sections. The first section begins by mentioning one of his first novels, The Cloud Atlas, and how to write the novel. He had to do extensive research, even though it was a fiction piece. In the succeeding sections, he writes about how his encounters with others made him question what fiction meant, what a myth was, and did they hold truth? He continues the next sections, speaking of religion, specifically Catholicism. Is the story of Jesus Christ a myth, or true, or both? The integrity of his work revolves around truth. Every section touches upon the topic. Throughout the article, the author also analyzes the work of other fiction writers, and even inserts quotes and passages of their writing in his article to better represent his views on fiction writing. By doing so, he is able to broaden his perspective and obtain information from others on the topic, which in turn makes his article all the more credible. The argument of the story revolves around fiction being just as, if not more informative and true than nonfiction writing. Due to fiction's capability to instill a sense of belief in its audience, it should be held in a higher regard amongst people in society and used as a tool to find grace in their life. Callanan begins the article by mentioning the first novel he wrote, The Cloud Atlas. He writes of his process and the struggle and criticism he faced from writing the novel. He writes that all his characters were not real people, however, they were reflective of real people. Before writing the novel, Callanan researched everything he had to make this fiction work as correct as possible. He interviewed veterans, historians, and even a bomb disposal expert to make sure that what he was writing was accurate. The author took advice from anyone who could offer up their wisdom. He uses these reflections to create a story that is true. He continues to write about how fiction does not mean not true. For example, the main character in the story was named Louis Belk. After Callanan published his novel, he received an email from a real-life man who was also named Louis Belk, and whose life almost seemed to mirror that of the protagonist in the story. In the first section, the article titled, A Twitch Upon the Thread, Callanan highlights the difference between fiction and nonfiction, and belief is introduced as a major theme in the work. The author writes, Good nonfiction teaches us what to believe, but I believe fiction teaches us to believe. This goes to show his views of his preferred writing style, fiction, in comparison to the opposite form of writing, nonfiction. He touches upon truth and what it is. He questions what people see as true, and the idea of religion as fiction is first brought up in this section. He then concludes the section by describing that in fiction there is a connection between reader and writer that is not found in nonfiction. The writer has the ability to evoke emotions in the reader, to change their way of thinking, or even convert them to a certain belief, and once one realizes that fiction holds these powers, it is said that they have gone through Addison's walk. He mentions a story involving 3 college men who experienced Addison's walk: Hugo Dyson, J.R.R. Tolkien, and C.S. Lewis. He quotes another author, Flannery O'Connor, a Catholic writer. It is generally supposed, and not least by Catholics, that the Catholic who writes fiction is out to use fiction to prove the truth of his faith, or at least to prove the existence of the supernatural. By doing so, he solidifies his argument about fiction. In the preceding section, The Pursuit of Grace, Callanan gets more personal about his love for fiction. He believes that fiction can be used to help others find grace. He also references a Catholic writer, Kirsten Valdez Quad. The author notes, Quad's work is the pursuit of grace. By writing about characters who are blind to the truth, it gives the reader the capability to see the truth of others, which, in turn, allows them to see the truth in themselves. Quad manages to modernize the piece, making it seem all the more real and relatable to the reader. In the section, Saints and Sinners, Callanan uses Ron Hansen's answer to the question, What is Catholic fiction? To show just how different Catholic fiction writers are from any other type of writer, Callanan references the yes and response they use in their writing, as opposed to the yes but response other writers tend to give. Catholic fiction writers are able to see things others cannot, such as the struggle of good versus evil people have within themselves, a theme that is often found throughout literature work. The supernatural and the real is another section of the article that Callanan uses to prove his argument that fiction holds truth, and breaks the idea that fiction means something is fake and untrue. Callanan references William Kennedy's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Ironweed. He writes about transporting yourself into another world and not only accepting things as true, but believing things are true. The supernatural and real intertwine in his novel Ironweed. Fiction versus nonfiction is brought up yet again in this section. Callanan uses a personal story of the time he got so attached to a fictional story that he went so far as to write to Kennedy asking for truth, not about the author himself, but about the characters. The final section of the work is labeled Fiction Makes Life. In this section, Callanan debunks that a story can only have 3 main characters. He does so by using his collection of short stories titled Listen as an example. To reinforce his argument, he lists all the benefits fiction has on people and why we should all learn to value fiction in the world of writing. He then goes on to conclude that fiction is about turning words into meaning. Fiction teaches us how to recognize things that we would not in our everyday normal lives. Fiction teaches agility by exercising our mind in a way no other form of writing can. It is a reflection of life, but it is up to us to be able to interpret it and apply it. Through my research on the rhetorical context of the work, I found this piece to be heavily rooted in religion. Liam Callanan is motivated to write due to his Catholic belief and his idea of fulfillment. Through his writing, he helps others believe, gives them a sense of fulfillment leading them to grace, uses his worldly experience as well as those of other Catholic fiction writers to create reflections of the truth. Characters, stories, myths, and legends are all characterized as fiction that holds truth, exaggerations and reflections of what is considered real. Callanan's writing shows that we can learn to believe. We can choose to believe in things that are not just black and white. We can learn a great deal through fiction and apply it to our lives in order to better improve our persona. Throughout the article, the recurring theme of truth is brought up. The whole article responds to the conversation of, what is truth? This article, however, speaks of truth specifically in fiction writing and Catholicism. The article also responds to the topic of belief. Are we losing our ability to believe? And what could we do to get it back? Upon further research, I found that there is a controversy as to whether or not we are losing our sense of belief. In an article titled, Stuck, Losing Our Imagination and Sense of Adventure, written and published by Matt Dabbs on wineskins.org. Dabbs writes about how we stopped viewing our lives as a grand adventure. Adults tend to lose their sense of imagination, which decreases their ability to think critically and problem solve. Callanan, in his article, The Fiction of Truth and the Truth of Fiction, provides a solution to this problem. Fiction. Remember that quote I highlighted earlier in the video?
But it's a profound sense of these characters trying to believe in each other and believing in things that they can't see.
Both articles seem to address the same conversation. Even Stephen King, an American author of horror, had something to say about this. He quotes, "Kids, fiction is the truth inside the lie, and the truth of this fiction is simply enough. The magic exists." So, to wrap up this project, what did I learn? I learned that the article, The Fiction of Truth and the Truth of Fiction, written by Liam Callanan, is a credible source to use on the topic of writing, reading, rhetoric, and language. I also learned that it speaks to a larger conversation. It speaks about belief. It speaks about religion. It speaks about imagination. All of these are topics that I can use this source for. Now, hopefully that I finished this project, you can see why I decided to insert that clip in the beginning, which at first may have seemed weird and like it had nothing to do with this entire project, but in fact it did. It all speaks to the same conversation. And here are all of my citations that I used for this project. I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk for this long.